Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.10 support tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the support role this patch. We saw a nerf towards Lulu, Yumi, and Fiddlesticks. We saw a slight adjustment towards Senna. Hasn't really been a huge power shifter in support. In fact, her best support build has honestly gotten weaker, leaving her in probably a slightly power negative spot compared to the previous patch. And then there were some other changes, stuff to do with the mage item system receiving some general buffs, and some of the champions which opted into Horizon Focus being slightly weaker as they benefited more from the 10% damage amp than the additional AP which can help with like wave clear and stuff like that. Let's get into it. So the DT is going to consist of the same four champions. We have MF, who is just in need of buffs for support. She's relatively unpopular, I believe. Riot, I mean, if they were fans of the playstyle, they would have already probably buffed her, but she still has some level of audience. Most of them are going to be in the lower ranks. This pick does not see very much play whatsoever in higher MMR brackets. I think, yeah, without buffs, I just don't really recommend ever playing this pick. Malphite and Veigar, for that matter, are both just very gimmicky picks. They are paired alongside Yasuo and Ziggs, respectively. In those duos, though, they tend to just be, pretty reliant on specific abilities. Veigar Cage, Malphite Ultimate. They have tools which could enable them to function as, like, harass champions in lane, but oftentimes they're just outvalued by the generalistic class of, like, artillery mages in the support role. And for that, I just can't really recommend them as picks. Ashe is probably in a different bracket to the other three champions here. I think if you're very comfortable with Ashe, you can actually get more value out of the champion than the other picks in this tier. That being said, though, she's an incredibly hard champion to get value out of. You need to very much abuse lane as much as possible. Riot have tried their best to kind of push Ashe away from the support role without, like, the AD, like, Halo Blades overbearing Ashe, and push her more towards AP variations, albeit the AP variations just aren't really there as options. Like Imperial Mandate still underperforms as an option on her. I can't really recommend this pick willingly. I think if you're very comfortable on her, though, you could maybe bump her up as like a C tier option, albeit you should probably still look for other champions within the support role. Gragas leads off the C tier. I think as a conditional counter pick, he can be fine, but I still just recommend other champions over him. I believe he saw a competitive game recently paired alongside the Senna. I'm not particularly sold on this champion. I think he needs a bit too many resources to kind of get value outside of just being a displacement champion, and then you just have to rely kind of on raw like mechanics and knowledge of the champion to kind of put people where you want them to be. And if enemy team has like mobility or does things which maybe aren't so much in your control, I think this pick just loses a ton of its value, and for that I just can't really recommend it as an option. And Mumu is only recommendable for how easy it is to play. I think outside of that, he's a pretty bad option. He kind of needs resources these days, and he doesn't have great itemization options. In the case of Mel, I think she probably sits towards the higher end of the C tier. I have seen some people make Mel support work in solo queue. That being said, though, she also needs a lot of resources to function, and I would recommend just playing her as a bot laner, or I think bot lane's probably her best role, and then mid lane's probably her second best role, but she tends to just be reliant on counter picks, making sure you're getting value out of that W spell. I think Ashe is one of the lanes where I've seen like consistently Mel being able to get value out of the Reflect on Ashe R, so that is definitely something to just be cognitive of. Annie probably should be bumped up to the B tier. I'm actually going to bump up Annie to the B tier. I think there is genuine value to this champion as a support at the moment. She has great CC and lockdown. Her damage isn't bad. In fact, you can kind of play on like your baseline kit. Tibbers is going to be a bit weaker these days compared to where he was in like the previous iteration of Annie, but she's just strong at the moment, and she is being nerfed in the next patch, but a lot of it is going to be primarily scaling nerfs towards like the W. I think the W is also receiving a 5% AP ratio nerf, and then her base armor is going, her base gut armor is going up, but her armor growth is going down. So it should probably be neutral to negative as the game goes on, but she's still doing better at the moment, so I'm going to bump her up to the B tier. The other champions which remain in the C tier are Sylas and Renata. I think Sylas just requires too many resources and a very specific spot most of the time to really function here. You're only really using him if you're like an auto-filled flex option. Outside of that, though, I just wouldn't really recommend playing Sylas support. Renata is very, very elo, I say elo locked, competitively skewed at the moment. A lot of her strength just came from the fact that she was really heavily utilized as a as a Kalista and to an extent a Varus pairing if you find these spots. If these two champions weren't as present as they were in competitive, I do think Renata would have been buffed at this point. but she's still in this limbo state where she just doesn't perform that well for solo queue and is a bit too reliant on other factors to kind of function as a champion. That being said, though, if you find the right spots and you're comfortable playing this pick, I do think she has more value than the other C tier options, so she does sit at the high end of the C tier. Just a pick which just doesn't perform that well in solo queue. I think she just falls into that bracket, unfortunately. Nidalee leads off the B tier options outside of Annie. Nidalee support honestly has value. Like, there are certain builds which do function as champion, like opting into a support centric build, and even we've seen some like more AP heavy builds has allowed this champion to find its functionality here. I don't think it's one of the best options, and as a raw enchanter, she just won't cut it compared to the other options. But if you can utilize the extent of her kit and the mechanics and the outplay potential, I do think Nidalee support is a genuine option which you can lean into. So if you're comfortable playing Nidalee, Nidalee support isn't bad by any means. I do think you can find spots where this champion will genuinely be better than most of the other options in the pool. Hui is a fine option, didn't really benefit from the mage item buffs compared to a lot of the other champions in this patch. And like Horizon Focus did end up being slightly weaker for most of the support champions which opt into it, because the AP bonus on, they basically traded the 10% damage amp for more AP, but they valued the 10% damage amp because the AP is better for like clearing waves on top of doing like more damage to opponents. Debuffs next patch to the item though should probably bump up some of these champions, so be on the lookout for like your Hui, your Vel'Kozes, your Zerefs, even your Luxes, I do believe will start opting into this item more consistently. Right now, though, Hui sits as like a low B tier pick. Also have Teemo in the low B tier. I think this champion can legitimately function as a support option, especially in lower MMR brackets and in the right spots. And like as an individual champion, I think you can get to those late game scenarios where you do just do enough damage to be valuable for your team. Your lane's going to obviously be weaker compared to some of the other options, and when you see Teemo support, the first usual kind of instinct is that this player's probably trolling. But I do think this pick can legitimately function as an option, so Teemo is going to be within the B tier. Blitzcrank sits within the B tier. He's fine. I think if you find the right spots for Blitzcrank, he can be really good. And if you're already comfortable playing Blitzcrank, I've seen this champion absolutely take over games, so I would say he's B tier, but like on a very, very kind of like loose term. I think this champion can quite comfortably jump up in the right spots and quite comfortably drop down even if you're picking him into compositions where you just don't really have a great hook target, because then you're just being outvalued by other support options. Pyke sits within the B tier on the basis of just being really difficult to play. Like, Pyke is probably the hardest support option in the game. Maybe like in the Bard's like up there as like one of the higher options, but like Pyke is definitely a champion you need to sink a lot of time into, really understand his kill ranges, and picking him in a right spot can also be really meaningful. I think if you're comfortable on him though, he can definitely compete with the A and even S2 options, so Pyke also a bit more of a conditional like B tier option. Tahm Kench is a very much locked B tier option. This champion I don't like that much at the moment. I think he's been over nerfed, and Riot don't look to be in any hasty state of buffing him. There are builds, more selfish builds that being said, which can function on this champion, like your Heartsteel builds, but then it becomes a lot harder to really like value the champion when you are just opting into just traditional Tahm Kench top itemization, and I think that probably puts him in a pretty murky spot as a champion anyway. So Tahm Kench does sit in the B tier at the moment. I don't think the kind of the fantasy of the champion really lines up maybe correctly with where like how you actually want to play him in game. So yeah, it sits in the B tier, like low end of the B tier at the moment. Zac is a fine option. I think if you're an OTP and you've been like auto-filled in support and you play a lot of Zac, or you're just a Zac enthusiast, I do think there's genuine spots where this champion can have value, and it's more about draft than anything. I think in the right draft scenarios, Zac support is pretty good. Not really blindable, but it's there. It's there as an option. It's a slightly below the bar pick, but I think in the right spots, then yeah, you can definitely get value out of this champion. Gallo sits in the B tier as well. I think he's also a pretty solid option. In the right spots, can definitely be really valuable, but can struggle in spots not really, like if you like blind the champion. He struggles a bit with itemization, and I think that a lot of the engaged supports, which don't want to go like your Lockets, have that issue at the moment. That's why item like Even Shell would be lovely in the game at the moment, but here we are. There's a lot of champions which are kind of in this boat, and we do just need more itemization in the game. I think there are certain champions which really struggle for item identity and probably lean into items which maybe aren't so desirable for how they want to play. Rakan is actually towards the higher end of the beta now. I think he's gradually over time been performing a bit better for solo queue. He was underperforming for a while. They buffed him, and yeah, I'd say he sits as more like a high beta option now. If you're comfortable playing Rakan, he's still one of the best support options in the game. Pairs really nicely alongside the likes of Xayah, and yeah, put the time into this champion. I think he can be really rewarding. It should probably just be a champion which you consistently have within your pool, albeit I would recommend other options over him at the moment. Yuumi definitely sits at the bottom of the beta. You could probably even argue should be dropped down to the C tier. The nerfs were sizable, and she's definitely tanked a decent amount since I believe it's like 3 consecutive nerfs on the champion. So not a pick I really recommend. There are certain pairings which she can definitely still abuse, and she can be pretty good for like just not specifically like learning how to play the game, but like observing and then kind of understanding how certain marksmen maybe want to play their lanes out. I don't really recommend Yuumi because I think she is an incredibly unique champion in the way she functions and probably quite stunting to play. But if you're on OTP, I think she probably just sits back to being below the bar and as like a low B2 option, maybe even C2 option. I don't really recommend the champion that much anymore. Seraphine hasn't been performing quite as well recently, and like across generally all of her roles, she's like fine. She is a jack of all trades champion after all, which kind of opts into a multitude of playstyles, but her value has definitely decreased as of recent. I think if she received any buff though, she would shoot back up as like a really good option. I think if you pair alongside the likes of an Ashe, you can still be a really good champion. So definitely sits still within the realm of beta, just not quite as performant at the moment. Lux sits within the beta, a champion which I think will very much benefit from the Horizon Focus buffs next patch if you want to opt into like a Malignant's Horizon Focus core or like a Luden's. Now the item is cheaper. There are different routes you can go with Lux, and I think generally she will benefit from the itemization changes or like the buffs next patch and will benefited from the itemization changes. She sits currently as like a high B, but I probably will bump her up to A tier next patch with the changes towards Horizon Focus. Swain and Brand are 2 champions which still remain in the B2 at the moment. In the case of Swain, I don't like support Swain that much. I've made that pretty clear over time. I think this champion wants more resources than you're going to really get in support. That being said though, I think he tends to be just compositionally dependent and into pretty heavy engage or compositions which just don't have a huge amount of burst damage. I think he can be a really valuable pick. Brand is just not very good at the moment. He should really thrive in this elo bracket. Like the gold to diamond, gold to like master area should be where Brand is like the most performant out of like his elo brackets. But he's just under the bar at the moment, and I think that probably leaves him in a pretty undesirable spot. So I just don't really recommend Brand, albeit he can still function as an option here. He just sits as like a low beta pick. Senna remains within the beta, and honestly probably even more like mid beta now. I think the changes ended up being negative for support because the Echoes of Helia Moonstone build just ended up being slightly weaker. I think they went slightly too hard on the AP ratio. I think they could have gone 5% instead of 10% on the Q, and she could have maybe received a slight bit more for like the support skewed center. Right now though, she functions nicely as an ADC. She can still function as a support, albeit maybe not as recommendable as a support as some of the other options, and she relies a bit more on composition and can't really be played as blind when things like your hook champs can just be utilized really effectively against her. She really does struggle into those engage heavy compositions because of how squishy she is, so definitely something to be cognitive of. Moving down from the A to the B tier is Xerath. Xerath lost power with Horizon Focus being nerfed. He was a low A tier. He now sits as a high B tier. He'll probably be bumped back up to the A tier with the Horizon Focus buffs next patch. Fiddlesticks drops all the way down to the B tier. He sits as a high B tier, but definitely lost a lot of power. I think if people stopped going Malignance and went back to Trailblazer, because there's definitely been some level of like mix up there, and I think some people are testing her Malignance with the nerf or with the buff to the item and the nerf to the more utility centric Fiddlesticks, now pushing him more towards wanting AP. It still looks Trailblazer skewed, and I definitely recommend still continuing to go that. And if you do, then yeah, he'll probably be back up to the A tier, and might even be back up to the A tier next patch, but definitely lost a sizable amount of power. It's probably generally net weak at the moment. Could honestly have had some more compensation buff, maybe even slightly more on the AP ratio on the Q, because losing CC on the champion like Fiddlesticks is meaningful. He will lose damage from not having the level of lockdown which he had previously, so definitely going to have lost some power there. Moving on to the A tier then, there are two champions moving up, and that is LeBlanc and Zoe. They are two of the biggest winners of the AP item changes this patch, alongside Elise, who I will talk about momentarily, but definitely these two champions are very deserving of A tier spots. I think people have caught on to the fact that Zoe is very good at the moment, and LeBlanc supports honestly more performant than LeBlanc mid and not in competitive in solo queue, and I would always recommend LeBlanc support as like at least trying to learn the champion, because you don't have to kind of focus on CSing, which is one of the harder parts of LeBlanc. She does struggle with wave management because her kit isn't really designed for that, like doesn't really have those tools as functional options. The Q has been buffed more recently though to kind of enable her to not be as bad at wave clearing though, so there are some kind of things going right for her there, but yeah, these two champions definitely bumped up to the A tier, benefited from their buffs. Morgana, I don't like Morgana. I've also made this pretty clear. Morgana and Swain are probably my least favorite support designed champions. I think they both would benefit from not being supports or just having slightly different kits to kind of make them more functional support options. That being said, both the buffs were nice for her. I think she could probably sit as a high B tier, low A tier option. I'm going to have her as a high B tier because I just don't really recommend Morgana. But if you do play her already, then yeah, you can continue to play her and will probably get good results. Karma benefited from Malignance being buffed this patch. Sits as a pretty solid A tier option. That being said though, the main build which I've seen is still the Echoes of Helia Moonstone build with like the 3-point skew Emax or just raw Emax. You can opt into different ways of playing the champion mode. Malignance being buffed does just help her AP build if you do opt into that route. Pantheon sits within the A tier. He's a good AD, aggressive support, and I think he's in a pretty solid spot for support at the moment because he is pretty unique compared to most of the other options. You're not going to get that level of like damage, which is also AD outside of other support or outside of Pantheon, other than Pyke. Like Pyke is probably the only other one, and Pyke's one of the hardest supports to opt into. So he's pretty unique in where you can pick him. So I like him as an option. Shaco sits within the A tier, pretty niche option here. If you play Shaco already, he's still going to continue to be a really good support option. If you don't, he's a pretty hard support to play. You do just have to know where you can kind of like where your power is and how you can utilize your boxes around the map to really get value. Because I've seen a lot of useless Shaco supports, but I've also seen a lot of Shaco supports just take over the game by being able to control vision, finding angles on their own lane, or just having really good boxes set up around the map. Zilean, a solid A tier option, just sits above the bar as a pretty good pick, I think in the right spots. Zilean is a great champion. He tends to require good spots. If you pick him in a bad spot, then he can definitely be considerably weaker as an option. But generally, yeah, Zilean, if you play him already, is still a pretty good option. Bard, a pretty hard support to play. I think Bard and Pyke are like 1-2 as like the harder like support options to lean into, but if you can play them really well, they are two of the highest capping supports. I think Bard right now though is in a very good spot. Definitely sits as a very solid A tier option. You can opt into damage, you can opt into durability, your playmaking potential is incredibly high, and so is your outplay potential, so I really do recommend him as an option. But of course remains as an A tier pick. He didn't lose quite as much power as Zeref, but did end up slightly weaker, so still just like remains as like a mid to low A tier option. Will also benefit from the buffs towards Horizon Focus X patch. So still a pretty good mid to low elo support option. I do think she struggles considerably more in high elo because she just isn't going to get the same level of gold income, but her individual agency is definitely higher than most of the other support options, and she definitely really thrives within this elo bracket, so she does maintain a spot within the A tier. Maokai, I really like. He's a good flex option, and combined with the like lockdown of the champion, the incredibly powerful ultimate, the vision control, I just think he has a great amount of tools which can really support him as a good support option. Some of your more mainstream ones are like your Alistars, your Nautiluses, your Leonas, who have all been buffed for solo queue more recently and are already all mainstay, like, competitive options. I think in the right spots, all these picks are probably going to be, like, your top 3, or, like, outside of maybe, like, Rail and Braum, like, some of your top, like, 3 engage or counter-engage options. I think they definitely deserve their spot towards the mid to high end of the A tier. Soraka, Milio, great, like, enchantry options. Soraka still is just really good with her healing and being able to pair alongside champions, which could really benefit from the sustained fight patterns and into melee picks. She can really, like, punish them with the constant rotation of heals. And if they don't have the damage to just outright burst someone down, then I think Soraka really dominates in those scenarios. Milio is an incredibly underrated support. I think he's very deserving of an A tier spot, and if you pair him with the right champions, I do think the tools he can provide are some of the best within the game. Thresh is an underrated support as well. I know a lot of people hate on Thresh because of his inconsistencies, but I think in the right spot he can be really good. That being said, though, if you pick him in the wrong spot, you can kind of see why people get frustrated about the champion, so it makes sense to an extent. Nico, really good as a mid and support option. I think she's incredibly hard to play. Like, she's probably also up there with, like, your Pikes and Bards, purely because the value out of you can get out of your W is incredibly high, but most people don't use the W effectively, and that's where the real power of this champion shines. Poppy is a great counter pick, same with Tarek, same with Shen. I think in the right matchups, these are some of the best picks you could opt into. Shen, obviously, a great flex option as well, and so is Poppy for that. Tarek is incredibly niche. Most people won't understand how to play against him effectively, and if you can utilize his ultimate and his tools well, I think he is one of the most kind of like game warping supports in the game. The tools, well, not even the tools, but like the Q healing combined with the sustained damage are just all very, very nice on him. I'm losing my voice. Moving up to the S tier then, Elise leads us off. She is in an incredibly good spot at the moment. Her damage really went up so much with the AP item changes, and I think that has really, like, sizably jumped from the A to the S tier. That being said, though, she's being nerfed next patch, and that will be meaningful. So with the other options with the S tier, Lulu got nerfed this patch, still remains as like a low S tier option. Could probably be dropped down to the A tier though if other things kind of like pop up. Some of the other charter options include like your Giannas, your Sonas, and your Nabis. I think all these 3 picks are great for solo queue at the moment. Nabi really benefits from Lucian being strong at the moment, and Lucian being nerfed will affect her, but she can also pair really nicely with a load of other options. And then Rail Braum are probably my number 1 to recommend just have within your pool supports at the moment. Braum is great as a counter engage option, one of the best champions in the game for that matter. And then Rail, just generally as an engage pick, is incredibly powerful and in an incredibly good spot at the moment, and probably my number 1 recommended within that area. Nabi, Braum, Rail are my 3 recommended champions of the patch. If you're looking for a champion with a bit more agency, I recommend Elise. And those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.